The Capital Region's only 7 p.m. news. CBS 6 News starts now. America's pastime.
They said this is where baseball started.
Where it all began. Did it begin in the illustrious Cooperstown, New York, thanks to Abner Doubleday? Was it thanks to the New York Knickerbockers? Or was it in New York's neighboring Massachusetts in the city of Pittsfield?
The city of Pittsfield wanted Cooperstown to move to Pittsfield.
We answer these questions, what you may not know about baseball's origins in Berkshire County.
The rest is history.
Plus, a closer look at the Capital Region's own storied past on the diamond. A spotlight on baseball's origins starts right now. Good evening and welcome to a special edition of the CBS 6 News at 7 o'clock. I'm JT Fetch, and tonight a CBS 6 spotlight on baseball history in our area. Cooperstown, known for its rich history and role in the origins of baseball, it is the site of the Hall of Fame and where some believe Civil War general and Saratoga County native Abner Doubleday created the game. While baseball historians have since debunked it as a myth, it is one that remains prominent with baseball fans. But just a few hours east, the Berkshires are home to a vast and rich history of America's pastime as well. We caught up with a local historian on baseball's beginnings in Berkshire County, and in tonight's CBS 6 Baseball History Special, we're getting a much bigger picture of the game's origins. Most have heard the tall tale that Civil War General Abner Doubleday, who was born in Ballston Spa, invented the game of baseball in 1839. A claim put out by the Mills Commission in 1905 designed to investigate the true origins of baseball. But the Doubleday myth is indeed a myth.
Well, that's what they were trying to do in the early 1900s. And this story looked like it clicked, but further investigation by all the people we have today that can investigate things like that found out that it wasn't true.
The Mills Commission's evidence found to be outdated years after their findings. Larry Moore, author and director of baseball in the Berkshires, giving us a tour of this exhibit in Lenox. We asked Larry about the origins of baseball because some argue in Pittsfield, a small sign posted outside the City Hall building all the way back in 1791 proves this is where it all started.
So up here you have the broken window bylaw from Pittsfield. And they found this back in the early 2000s. John Thorne, who is the archivist of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, he came through looking for a document they heard might be possible that it was here. And he found it in the archives, and it stated that no game of ball could be played within 80 yards of the town meeting hall.
The 1791 sign is the earliest example historians and scholars have found of the word baseball mentioned in any document. Some even point to the very first college baseball game played in Pittsfield in 1859 between Amherst and Williams colleges as yet another example of the game's origins in the Berkshires. That game, a high-scoring affair, quite unique for the time, when Amherst defeated Williams in a rout, 73-32. How did it get to be such a blowout? Moore says the rules were drastically different in Massachusetts at the time.
Now, there were no foul balls. The ball could be hit frontwards, backwards, or sideways.
Those rules ultimately merging with the New York Knickerbocker rules, which allowed for overhand throwing and standard gameplay, leading to the game we know and love today. So where does baseball really begin? Moore gave us a compelling answer.
What we have found is that baseball evolved over the centuries. You even go back to the Egyptians. There are hieroglyphics on the pyramids that show a person with a stick and a ball.
Just think about that, no foul balls. Berkshire County, the birthplace of two Hall of Famers now immortalized in Cooperstown with the game's best players. Frank Grant, who played in smaller leagues before the Negro Leagues came about, known as the pre-Negro Leagues. His prowess in the 1880s and 90s brought about a legendary Hall of Fame career. CBS 6 Sports Director A.J. Pankowski joining us now live in studio tonight with more on that. A.J.?
That's right, JT. CBS 6 spoke with Larry Moore of Baseball in the Berkshires Group about his life and connections to his home state of Massachusetts and even his ties to upstate New York.
Ulysses F. Grant, popularly known as Frank Grant, was born in Pittsfield on August 1st, 1865, went on to become one of the greatest African-American players of the pre-Negro League era in the late 19th century. Early in his career, Grant moved to Williamstown in Berkshire County, playing for minor league teams. Grant, no stranger to the North Country here in New York State either.
From there, he went to play for a team in Plattsburgh, New York.
The Plattsburgh team Grant played for was ironically named the Plattsburgh Nameless, but that wasn't the end of his story in the Empire State.
He bounced around a little bit, but then ended up in Buffalo, New York.
Grant went on to play for the Buffalo Bisons, Cuban Giants, and Cuban Ex-Giants, all barnstorming teams in the late 1800s, teams looking to play wherever and whenever they could. But it was the Cuban Giants who became the Cuban Ex-Giants over a souring relationship between players and ownership who spent a good amount of time in the Berkshires as a minor league team.
We find a lot of mention of both of those teams throughout Berkshire County barnstorming.
Grant led his teams in batting average, topping a 300 for both years 1886 and 1887. But it wasn't easy. Grant, a black player, dealt with white majority teams in Buffalo who opposed integrated teams with black players on them. The pressure from the opposition ultimately became too much for ownership.
The white players felt that these black players were taking their places, especially when they're highly skilled, like Frank Grant was. Great base runner, great hitter, great fielder. So the pressure upon the owners to get rid of these players was very high. So in 1888, that's when they did that.
But sadly for Grant, the decision to break up the team that year deprived him of his chances to play professional ball. In 1889, the Buffalo Bisons became a pro team. Ulysses Frank Grant died in 1937, but decades later in 2006, the famous Pittsfield native was at long last inducted into Cooperstown's Hall of Fame for his historic accomplishments and perseverance.
Now, Grant isn't the only Hall of Famer born in Berkshire County. North Adams native Jack Chesbrough, known as Happy Jack, he was inducted in 1946.
Fascinating stuff. AJ, thanks so much. And still to come in tonight's look at America's pastime and where it all began.
We are talking baseball, and they were playing baseball.
A closer look at the breaking of baseball barriers and historical information you're seeing first on 6 tonight, only in Berkshire County. In the next portion of CBS 6's exclusive tour of the Baseball in the Berkshires exhibit, we got an in-depth look at their Breaking Barriers section, detailing the stories of women and minorities playing the game we all know in a time when white men were dominating the growing sport. And we also learned about a piece of history discovered by the exhibit in the summer of 2024 regarding the Sultan of SWAT, George Herman Babe Ruth, that you're seeing first here on 6 tonight. We took a look upstairs at the Breaking Glass and Breaking Barriers portion of our tour with a look back at the teams and players many likely have never heard of playing ball in the Berkshires. Before the Negro Leagues, there were the pre-Negro Leagues through the 1880s and early 1900s. Among them, the Capital Region's own Albany Braves and New York Black Yankees. The Black Yankees frequently played in Albany, and many of those games umpired by Pittsfield native John Persip, who rode his bike to the games in his free time.
But he was such a good umpire that when the New York Black Yankees came to play in Albany, he went over to umpire their games.
And now that the MLB recognizes this era of the Negro Leagues as a major league, Persip's time on the ball field now recognized as major league umpiring. In the next portion of our tour, CBS 6 got a look at women's baseball in Berkshire County, which is far more extensive than you may realize. Research conducted by Larry Moore shows us the history of women's baseball in the Berkshires goes back well over a century.
I happened to come across a book that mentioned that there was a private school still here in Pittsfield today called Miss Hall's School, played and had 2 baseball teams in 1905.
We also learned about women like Jackie Jackson, who tried out for the Washington Senators minor league team based in Pittsfield, but was turned down and ultimately sent south.
Here's a girl that tried out for the Senators in 1971 and was going to make the team, but the general manager of the team was a teacher and said, I don't need the publicity.
Over the years, women's baseball evolved into one of the more popular sports globally, girls softball, a game that continues to remain a prolific sport in Berkshire County. And we were surprised there was one last stop in our incredible tour with a look at a Babe Ruth exhibit that showed his unique connection to the Berkshires.
Every kid my age or person my age will have a grandfather story that his grandfather hunted with this guy by the name of George Ruth.
CBS 6 also learning some new information the exhibit just discovered in the summer of 2024 about Babe Ruth's roommate. Davey Davidson played alongside the Babe in Baltimore for minor league teams well before Ruth's ascent to the majors. We're told the information came from Davidson's granddaughter from Berkshire County, who told her high school teacher about her grandfather's experience with the Babe, but her teacher didn't believe it. Luckily, there's documentation to back up the claims.
The girl went home quite despondent and wrote a letter to her grandfather explaining what had happened. He in turn wrote a letter back to her with newspaper articles and everything standing up for what he had done. 1913 got signed by the Baltimore Orioles minor league team.
But it wasn't long after when the owner of the Orioles asked if Davidson could take a roommate coming out of industrial school in 1914.
There is mention of his roommate, George Herman Babe Ruth, that he did room with and pitch with because Davey Davidson was a pitcher also.
Davidson, who was born in Medford, did reside in Great Barrington for a period of time, but his time rooming with Ruth in Baltimore was cut short once the Bambino was sold off to the Red Sox.
In the 1914 season, Jack Dunn was strapped for cash and sold his contract to the Boston Red Sox. The rest is history.
The rest is history. Now let's head back to Pittsfield tonight to historic Wakakona Park. The park was created by George Burbank in 1892 and later taken over by the city in 1919 for construction. However, recently the park shut down over grandstand safety concerns. CBS 6 found out about the history of the park and just how much it has changed over the decades.
Our first ballpark in Pittsfield, or in Berkshire County, was known as Wakakona Park.
CBS 6 getting an exclusive look at the history of a long-standing stadium in Berkshire County.
All the players that played at Wakakona Park and later went into the Baseball Hall of Fame, they weren't necessarily from Berkshire County, but they were visitors from other minor league teams.
The Pittsfield Electrics were the first ball club to play at Wakakona Park. Behind me is that very stadium, well over 100 years old, and despite its age, it continues to stand the test of time.
This is actually a replica of the Pittsfield Electrics, and Hillies played with a uniform that looked like that.
Larry Moore of Baseball in the Berkshires sharing these photos with us, showing the progression of the ballpark from the late 19th and early 20th century to modern day. The most recent team to play here, the Pittsfield Suns, named after a quirky design based on the field's location.
Wakakona Park is one of two remaining fields in the country that was built facing the wrong direction. And the problem is that the sun sets in the batter's eyes. So now that wasn't a problem way back because all the baseball games were played at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. When the sun is setting, they have to have a sun delay. And the games pause for half an hour to let the sun set far enough.
Sadly, the park has remained shut down due to safety concerns over the grandstand area.
They tried to patch it together and had bleachers on the outside of the grandstand for a couple years.
But good news, the city's Wakakona Park committee has recommended to the mayor a construction plan to redesign the park for baseball fans across the region. And while baseball in Berkshire County has grown and evolved over the century and a half, the game remains a staple of the county's common bond.
And we're looking forward to watching a ball game there again soon. Still to come, Greg Floyd and AJ Pankowski join us next with a spotlight on some baseball history here in the Capital Region. Stay tuned. Well, tonight we're taking a closer look at some Capital Region baseball history. It was 70 years ago this summer that some kids from Schenectady were on top of the world. They were winners of the 1954 Little League World Series. Greg Floyd is here now with the story of one of those players who helped put Schenectady on the baseball map. Greg.
And a pretty good story it is, JT. Thank you so much. Chuck Caputo is in his 80s now. He lives in Glenville with his wife. 70 years ago, he was on the ride of his life, part of the team that came to be known as Destiny's Darlings. In 1953, the Schenectady team lost in the Little League World Series championship game, but 1 year later, 54, with 4 returning stars surrounded by a cast of new players and manager Mike Maeda, they went all the way, defeating a California team to claim the title. Only 5 of those 1954 players are still with us, including Chuck right there. He sat down with us to talk about the memories of that magical trip to Williamsport for the Little League World Series.
They were having a kind of like a carnival type of thing for the teams, something to do in the off days. And I remember Mike Maeda wouldn't allow us to go because he was afraid somebody would get hurt. And lo and behold, we played Colton, California for the final game. And Kenny Hubbs, who went on to the major leagues with the Chicago Cubs, broke his toe playing a game at this carnival, so he played against us in the final game with a broken toe. I played against Boog Powell, who played for the Baltimore Orioles, and they had a big hill and a dike out in right field. He put one out over there, and Billy Mazzucci put one out over there from our team. Mike Maeda was my coach for all my years in Little League, but he was so far ahead of his time. He was he did things that no other managers did. Oh, it was unbelievable. It was just an experience that you'd never forget. You know, we came back and it was crowds and parades and people all over. We had banquets. We had, it was just a great experience. You know, something that you just keep with you all the time.
Absolutely. Chuck's son arranged a return trip to Williamsport for the family this year. Chuck threw out the first pitch at one of the games, and he spent time with some of the young players. Now, 2 players from that Little League team went on to brief Major League careers, Jimmy Barbieri and Billy Connors. Connors also a Yankees pitching coach. And this right here, I'm holding one of the game bats that Jim Barbieri used when he played with the Dodgers. Now, one of the greatest players to ever come from the Capital Region, Johnny Evers, the Hall of Fame second baseman from Troy, New York, famous for being part of the most renowned double play combination of all time with the Cubs of the early 1900s.
These are the saddest of possible words, tinker to Evers to chance. A trio of bear cubs and fleeter than birds, tinker to Evers to chance.
Yeah, that right there, perhaps the greatest baseball poem of all time, recited in part by the great-grandnephew of Johnny Evers, also named Johnny Evers. Sitting in his office in Colony, he regaled me with Johnny Evers' stories. After his playing career ended, Evers would bring players from the New York Yankees and other teams up to the area for exhibition games.
They would come up the Hudson and they'd play a couple games here at Hawkins Stadium. And Johnny Evers would say to his, his sister, he lived for a while with his sister's family, and to his cousins and brothers, we're all going to go over to my sister's house tonight, make something good for dinner, and I'm going to bring some of the players down, tell the neighborhood kids. And they'd all be sitting around dinner and everything, and in would come Babe Ruth to have dinner, or Lou Gehrig to have dinner. And all the neighborhood kids would be running down the street. They'd be grabbing baseballs, or they have a picture somewhere of a Babe Ruth signing a little girl's shoe. And they would sit around and hobnob.
That's one cool dinner. The modern-day Johnny Evers has in his office a huge photo from a crucial Cubs-Giants game in 1908 to decide the pennant. The Cubs won that pennant and the World Series that year. He also has an original Johnny Evers bat. Now, most of the rest of the family's memorabilia from his career was donated to Notre Dame University. And if you lived here for a while, you may remember that Evers and his family ran a sporting goods store in Troy and then in Albany for decades. And JT, I can tell you that many, many families from this area bought their baseball equipment over the years from Johnny Evers and his family.
Gosh, I love that. How about that story? Can you imagine? Yeah, come over for dinner. The babe's going to be here.
Have spaghetti with Babe Ruth.
I can't believe it. I love it. It's getting me chills just thinking about it. Thanks so much, Greg. Turning now to more Capital Region connections for America's pastime. CBS 6 Sports Director A.J. Pankowski is joining us here with a look at some of today's Capital Region stars in the majors right now.
And that is right, guys. The 518 sure had lots of talent to make it not only to the minor leagues, but even up to the MLB. This past year alone, handful of minor leaguers playing from across the area, but 3 people, a manager and 2 relief pitchers, were the talk of the town in the Capital Region. We start off with a skipper from Bethlehem High School, Royals manager Matt Quattraro. In his second year with Kansas City, Quattraro took his team to the ALDS from 106 losses in 23 to a postseason berth in 24. The future sure bright in KC. Now we go to our pitchers. We had an all-star Shaker grad. Phillies reliever Jeff Hoffman became the first all-star from the 518 since 1962. Hoffman finished with a 2.17 ERA. Finally, our other Shaker grad, Yankees reliever Tommy Kahnle, the changeup king. Kahnle, the lights out in the postseason, yet to give up a run in 6 separate appearances. And guys, he has a chance to win a World Series.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Awesome stuff.
Greatest game in the world.
It really is. Yep. Thank you so much. Great job, Michael. Labor of love, and we loved it. Thank you.